Richard Allen's defense attorneys claim Abby Williams and Libby German were killed by a group of Odinists, and their client Richard Allen is innocent. Odinism is a newer religion based on Old Norse concepts. Odinists have also been associated with white supremacist groups in America.
Well, hey folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I'm getting ready to wrap up my day at my office in Washington, D.C. But before I left, I took a minute and joined Vinnie Politan on Court TV to talk about the new court documents that were released in the Richard Allen case. That's the case of Abby and Libby German in Delphi, Indiana. And I'll tell you, this one is a bombshell. And there are a lot of parts to this that are going to really bother you. But I wanted to just share some of the conversation that I had with Vinnie tonight on TV, where I shared a little bit about my experience as a former ritual crimes investigator looking at groups like this one. I talk a little bit about paganism, about Odinism, and this case in particular. So
let's dive a little deeper into this. Joining me tonight from Washington, D.C., retired police commander, host of the Profiling Evil podcast, also an expert in cults and types of cases like this. Mike King is with us. Mike, great to see you tonight. This is extremely surprising. Wasn't expecting it. We're going through a lot tonight. But let's start with this description of the sticks and everything else, and this religion, Odinism. My understanding, Odinism goes back a long, long way.
Yeah, I mean, I remember looking at Odinism as part of looking into pagan belief systems, and this Odinism is separate from what you'd see in Judaism or Islam or Christianity. It's a real focus on these Nordic and Germanic gods. So think, for lack of a better example here, think of Marvel Comics, because that Thor, the guy with the big hammer, and his little brother Loki, who caused all the trouble, they were the children of Odin. Their father was Odin, and he is this guy who gave up his eye in search of more wisdom and other kinds of things. And so as people look at these different worship systems, you have people that are looking at monotheistic belief systems, like many Christians do, one God out there, or you have polytheistic religious belief systems that look at many gods. And we really came to know this when we were doing the Who Killed King Tut stuff that I worked on with Greg Cooper. And that polytheistic belief system is actually what led to Tut's death. So you can't discount these kinds of things when you hear them, and you really have to dig in and try to understand them. But you also can't go down a rabbit hole without evidence that's supportive of it. And what we're hearing is some pretty interesting stuff.
So I hope that this is helpful to you and that you find something valuable out of it. Now, at the end of this, I'm going to play the audio 130 plus page court document. I thought that might be easier than reading it, but you can certainly go online and grab that thing and download it and read it line by line. I think it's going to cause some concern for you. I hope that the prosecution and law enforcement can defend many of the things that are being challenged in this one, because it is disturbing. And frankly, the questions need to be answered. So make sure you stick around after my interviews with Court TV and listen to that audio recording. It's going to be from beginning to end. It'll be in a woman's voice, and she says Delphi by saying it Delphi. So don't be critical. I'm just using AI to translate all of the text in that huge document down to a voice so that you can listen to it. Maybe listen to it while you're driving to work in the morning.
And the description of Abby and Libby at the scene, I mean, it seems like there was some level of ritualism here. You're using this young girl's blood to paint some sort of a letter, and you're using these sticks to somehow, I don't know, send some sort of symbol or something. It's really bizarre. Let me read the description of Liberty German, because
Okay.
again, this is tough stuff, folks, and it's and really got to be difficult for the families today as well, as they learn all of this. Libby was found at the base of a tree with 4 tree branches of varying sizes intentionally placed in a very specific and arranged pattern. This is the part that's, again, gets even tougher, on her naked body. Libby's right arm was placed along the side of her body. 1 large tree branch had been placed on her left shoulder. This branch was so long that it extended above Libby's head several feet and below her legs for several feet as well. 2 smaller branches formed a V where her legs joined her body near her genitalia, with both sides of the V extending upward towards Libby's head, with 1 branch extending to the left of Libby's head and the other to the right of Libby's head. The last of the 4 branches extended across Libby's body on a line from her right shoulder to her left shoulder. This 4th tree branch was also connected with the other 3 branches and was placed under both branches that formed the V. Again, difficult. Libby's sliced neck was partially covered by this 4th branch. This is purposeful conduct that is taking place here, Mike. And I guess as an investigator, you could look at the way these branches are placed and try to connect it, if it is connected to some ritual, some group, some sect, or some religion.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge I face in these kinds of things, Vinny, is until we can see, and hopefully we never do, hopefully it's just something that's vetted in that courtroom, but you have to think there are many, many cases out there where inexperienced killers, once they get in the frenzy of killing, they start doing experimentation and other kinds of things that could lead to all kinds of wacky behaviors. So before things get assigned as being tied to Odinism, for instance, or something else, we have to really look at the totality of things and keep in mind, I mean, remember what they were saying in the 1800s about Jack the Ripper's victims and the mutilation that he was doing and the kinds of things that were going on. And there are so many explanations for things like a broken branch that might look like it was surgical, when in effect it might have been a very nice artifact of a really dry piece of wood that broke perfectly smooth. Rare, but possible, versus that young twig that's going to be kind of splintered and really look a little differently. But when you start getting things placed on there and you start seeing the staging that occurs, that starts to tell us a little more, too, about what was going on in the offender's mind. And again, I'm not ready to jump that this is a ritualistic killing versus maybe exploration, but I'm also not willing to discount what we're starting to hear in this thing if they've got truly evidence to back it up and not just theory and supposition.
Well, folks, this was the first examination we had into what really happened to Abby and Libby down in that little gully. And it was so disturbing to hear these kinds of details being laid out, especially any of the potential staging that was going on. But clearly, the amount of violence that was going on in the case. Now, we talked about Libby, but let's talk about Abby, and we went into a little detail into the report or the release of the document and the information behind how Libby and Abby both died.
Yeah, and again, apparently, according to the defense again, because they're the ones digging into the papers and releasing it through this memo, there were 3 investigators who were very much following this line of investigation. Now, let's take a look at the description of Abby's body. Abby was fully clothed. In fact, and this again, another one of these strange facts, Abby was dressed in Libby's sweatshirt and jeans. No blood appeared on Abby's clothing. Abby was found on her back like Libby. However, unlike Libby, Abby's elbows were bent, with her right and left arms both placed on her chest. Abby's left hand and arm near the left side of her face, and her right hand and arm near the right side of her face. Also, Abby's left leg was straight while her right leg was bent at the knee. The murderers, according to, again, the defense is saying there's more than one person doing this. The murderers also placed her bent right leg under her left leg. Above Abby's head were smaller sticks that had been placed over her hair, crudely mimicking horns or antlers. So,
yeah,
that description,
again, is that
it's very posed. I mean, it sounds, the way it's being described, that it is posed. It's not like a murder takes place and this is how the bodies end up. This is specifically done. I guess the question is the reason, and is it in fact consistent with anything connected to Odinists or these white nationalists referred to by the defense that have hijacked Odinism?
Yeah, the challenge that we find too in these kinds of things is, again, we want to try to assign it because our minds just can't wrap around it. But clearly the way that those children were left is symbolic of what was going on in this predator's mind, whether it was a fantasy that he was trying to fulfill, a recreation of an image that he's seen before, or whether he was just working this out and becoming the producer of his own little whacked out film. It's really difficult, or their whacked out film. But I think you're really hitting on something, and that is the suggestion that it might be something more in line with a supremacist movement. And we know that they're speaking about in that document this tie to the prison system and to a really rough culture and other kinds of things. And this is going to really require bringing the two sides together to sort this out. And frankly, if they've got evidence, then the prosecution's going to have to say, hey, this is why investigators excluded it and moved on.
So one thing the defense has done here that will prove to be, I believe, successful, because it'll just create more question and more doubt in the criminal justice system and in the prosecution, is they're suggesting that there are insiders involved in this criminal case, that Richard Allen is being forced to confess to something that he didn't do because of this organized cult of Odinites that were responsible for the deaths, in the defense's opinion, of Abby and Libby, and in forcing Richard Allen to confess to these crimes. I guess the challenge I have to all of this is, how on earth did it end up that Richard Allen happened to be walking on that trail? He confesses to that. How did it end up that Richard Allen's vehicle was found near the trailhead? He confesses to that, and there's video to back that up. That he also sees some people walking back and forth. And most importantly, how does all of this tie together, and his bullet, the bullet that has been cycled through his weapon that was later recovered at his home, end up at the crime scene? And this is where the defense is trying so hard to get all of that evidence thrown out so that the prosecution can introduce that evidence that ties Richard Allen back to that crime scene. But without question, they have raised things that have to be answered. The relationship law enforcement may or may not have had with this Odinite group, whether all of this has got any truth to it, or if it's just another ghost story. Let's listen to that exchange.
And I get it. That's, you know, that becomes a legal battle with the judge, what evidence comes in, what doesn't come in, etc. I'm only interested in one thing on this show, which is the truth, trying to figure out the truth, which is what prosecutors should be focused on as well. Mike King, let me ask you, is there any reason, like if the evidence is leading to these Odinites, is there any reason for law enforcement to protect the Odinites? Would we have to see if the investigators are Odinites? Would we have to, I mean, I don't get it. Like, this was the highest profile case they were ever going to have in Delphi, Indiana, by far, right? You've got all these agencies working on it. Why on earth, if this is a valid lead, would they not follow up on it?
As you know, as a case lead investigator, you often know things about the investigation that other people involved in the investigation may not know about, especially if they're from the outside, maybe like a trooper that picks up a piece of really good information and wants to share it up. And sometimes people really get focused on something and they're a dog on a bone that can't let go of it, and they create a theory before they really have facts. So they spend all their time trying to prove that they were right, and they actually become a detriment to the investigation. So that's really the mission ahead, I believe, for the prosecution, is to be able to say, these things were vetted, this is what really happened. And we're kind of seeing an inkling, I think, even in one of the news reports I read today, where they reached out and the prosecution is saying, nah, the FBI didn't quite say what's being alleged in the document. Heck, I don't know, Vinny, but all I know is that this is really good that it's coming out, and that their hand is being forced to say, we looked at it, and here's why it was excluded. And if you got to look into their backgrounds to say, hey, they're not Odinists or they're not part of this conspiracy, by golly, you got to do it. But I think Bob was right. The first thing I thought of, too, was Karen Reed. If I could just make everybody hate the criminal justice system and disbelieve it and have no faith in it, I might have won already.
Right. I get it. Okay.
Now, this new court document also brought out something that I think was pretty unexpected, and that is what sounds like pretty clear testimony by an ex-spouse of one of these Odinites that says he admits he was there and that there were others who were involved in this murder of Abby and Libby. Now, this is going to be really interesting because now there are challenges that will be brought up about whether she can actually testify against her spouse, former spouse, in this particular case. I also find it interesting that the defense brought out the fact that, hey, this woman even passed a polygraph examination, proving that she's telling the truth. Now, of course, if she had taken a polygraph, or if a defendant had taken a polygraph and it showed that they were deceptive, the defense would say, hey, by the way, you got to remember polygraphs have no bearing on anything that really happens. But this is going to be interesting. And Vinny asked me this question shortly after having a little exchange with Bob as we talked through these things. And I want to just play that little exchange.
I talked about the grain of salt when the defense has the theory, right? No offense, Bob. No offense. It's just I was a prosecutor. And this is the way I see the world. Another grain of salt when we have a statement from an ex-spouse. Do you trust the ex-spouses?
Who, me?
Mike. I'm sorry, Mike. I was going to Mike on that. I'm sorry, Mike.
Oh, no, you know, I mean, it's a mixed bag, and I guess that's where it's going to really have to come out what the motivation was for doing it, what she's been like during this period where she's not part of his life, and then whether they can get over the legal challenges of whether she's reliable or not. And, you know, I mean, this part of me that's the investigator, Vinny, goes back to the idea, if these murders were motivated because of a mixed race relationship, I suspect there are a whole lot more mixed race relationships going on in that county and in that part of the country. And why haven't we seen a whole batch of murders happen? And if that was the motivation. So I always kind of go back to well, it's possible, but how probable is it based on what we're learning? And that always kind of bugs me. And I always think about an interview I had with Richard Ramirez, if you remember that guy, the Night Stalker. I was sitting with him and I said, Richard, do you really believe in Satanism? And he smiled and he said, that was an afterthought the first time around, but then it became good business.
Wow. Yeah, and then here's a biggie to me, and I think one that can easily be proven or disproven, and that is were correctional officers in the jail where Richard Allen's being housed allowed to wear patches other than authorized uniform insignia and patches. In effect, the defense is saying that jailers inside of this correctional facility were wearing patches that said, in Odin we trust. And again, that seems so odd to me that would be allowed. And I'm going to be interested to see how that shakes out. But let's catch this exchange.
I can't imagine that anyone in uniform is allowed to put patches of anything other than your uniform on there. It should be provable one way or the other. but it seems like it's the attorneys who were saying they saw this.
I have to agree with you, Vinny. I was really saddened and shocked if, in fact, they're allowing that to go on a uniform that would be standardized. And I think that's going to be an easy one to either prove or disprove by the other correctional officers, by what the command staff says, and what the policy says. But if the defense says, hey, I witnessed it, that's going to be a little challenging for them to get over, too.
Anyway, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. And I hope you'll check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course here on YouTube. And please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button and sharing us with all your friends. We really do like to grow, folks, so please help us out. We're getting so close to the 175K mark on subscribers, and I'd really like to get there before I head over to CrimeCon on Friday and Saturday. So watch for me at CrimeCon, and if you're there, let's make sure that we find a chance to hook up and say hello and meet each other. And then I'll be doing Court TV Live on Friday night with Vinnie Politan.
Evidence in this case supports the following. 1. Members of a pagan Norse religion, called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. 2. Very early on, those in charge of the Delphi murder investigation claimed that they consulted with a Purdue professor concerning what resembled possible Odinism signatures left behind at the crime scene. After the Purdue professor proclaimed, according to State Trooper Jerry Holman, that it was not Odinism or any type of cult worshipping or any type of group that would have conducted the crime, the Odinism angle was essentially abandoned. However, as of September 7, 2023, the leaders of the Delphi investigation team 1. Claim that they can't identify who this purported professor was. 2. Have provided no reports from this purported professor. And 3. Have further indicated they may never be able to figure out who this professor is. Based in large part upon this mystery Purdue professor's opinion, the Delphi investigative leadership claimed that it essentially abandoned considering Odinite involvement in the murders. And then the years passed. 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. Thankfully, during those passing years, law enforcement officers Kevin Murphy, Greg Ferenczi, and Todd Click continued to pursue the truth. Because of their curiosity and investigative efforts, the evidence establishing the names of the likely murdering members of this Odinite cult became known to the Delphi investigative leadership no later than February 2018. Due to either incompetence or a concerted intentionality, those in charge of the investigation refused to arrest or even properly investigate these obvious suspects. 3. On May 1, 2023, the state of Indiana, by way of prosecutor Nick McClelland, received a letter from former Rushville Assistant Police Chief Todd Click, now retired, as stated in the previous paragraph. Click, Murphy, and Ferenczi were 3 of the law enforcement officers who worked on the Delphi murder case, particularly focused on the Odinite angle as it intersected with suspects in Rushville, Indiana. After reading Richard Allen's probable cause affidavit, Click became concerned that the information contained in Richard Allen's affidavit, pointing the finger at Richard Allen, was far less compelling than the totality of the information that Detective Ferenczi, Detective Murphy, and Officer Click had accumulated during the Rushville portion of the investigation. The information that Murphy, Ferenczi, and Click had gathered during their investigation connected men who practiced Odinism in or near Delphi with another group of men who lived in Rushville, and then connected both groups of men to the murders. Click was concerned that for some reason the leadership of the investigative team had failed to share with Prosecutor McClelland the evidence gathered by Click, Ferenczi, and Murphy. Click's concerns led him to seek out a lawyer to assist him in the drafting of a letter. This letter was then sent to McClelland. This letter was not provided to the defense until after it was obvious from the last round of depositions that the defense, who had doggedly pursued witnesses as far away as Georgia, would certainly be talking with Todd Click. McClelland had this letter in his possession for over 4 months before turning it over to the defense. There can be no mistaking that this letter is exculpatory in nature and could have been used by the defense as it prepared for upcoming depositions. However, it is apparent that McClelland only offered up the letter after it was obvious that the defense team would soon be learning of the letter's existence. In other words, the defense team would obviously be meeting with or deposing Click in the next few weeks. At that time, Click most certainly would then reveal to the defense that in April 2023, he, Click, had sent a letter containing exculpatory information to McClelland. At this point, McClelland had 2 distinct choices. 1. Sit on the exculpatory evidence, hoping that the defense team would refocus its efforts on another angle of the investigation. Or 2. Disclose the exculpatory evidence, claiming that the contents of the letter were overlooked in the volume of discovery. He chose the latter. Unfortunately for the state, neither approach explains away the fact that Click specifically directed the letter to McClelland himself. And further, Click was so determined to ensure his information was consumed by McClelland that he directed the information directly to McClelland via certified mail. The letter is stamped received May 1, 2023. Carroll County Prosecutor. Click's report landed at Ground Zero, a prosecutor's office with no more than 2 full-time prosecutors and a handful of full-time staff members at best. Could this exculpatory evidence have been completely overlooked? Not plausible. Not only did the prosecution withhold that letter from the defense, but law enforcement also withheld several other exculpatory pieces of evidence, including an 85-page compilation of reports by Click prepared in 2019, and several videos containing statements that support the defense theory of Richard Allen's innocence. This 85-page report detailed the investigative work performed by Click, Ferenczi, Murphy, and others, including the FBI. According to the summary of Click's investigation that he attached with his letter, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, of the FBI determined that the individuals responsible for the homicides were involved in Nordic beliefs. This was news to the defense, as no member of the unified command in charge of the investigation revealed this information to the defense during recent depositions. This includes Trooper Holman, who told the defense that he didn't remember if the FBI's BAU unit determined one way or the other whether those with Nordic beliefs had been involved in the murders. 6. At least up until the time of this filing, the prosecution has provided no evidence whatsoever of the findings of the FBI's BAU unit concerning involvement of Odinists in the murders. None. The letter that Click sent to McClelland was the first that the defense has heard that the FBI actually believed that Odinists were likely involved. In other words, this report contained exculpatory evidence that Unified Command concealed from the defense. This information was and is crucial for Richard Allen's defense. Some of this exculpatory evidence in the form of videos was finally released to the defense on September 8, 2023. Over 9 months after defense counsel entered their appearance. The defense is still reviewing this September 8th evidence dump. In the brief time the defense has had to review this newly received evidence, it has found exculpatory evidence both in the videos the defense has watched and the documents that the defense has reviewed. While the prosecution has been holding on to this exculpatory evidence, Richard Allen has been living in hell. Lastly, the evidence will show that the week of August 28, 2023, Prosecutor McClelland and State Trooper Jerry Holman requested a meeting with Todd Click. By this time, the defense team had taken several depositions, including Holman, Liggett, and Leesenby, and the prosecution and Delphi Investigative leadership now knew that for a while, the defense team had been aware of the Odinist evidence. At least the evidence that the prosecution turned over to the defense, scattered throughout multiple hard drives and many flash drives. The prosecution had learned in early August that the defense had figured out the strong Odinist ties to the crimes, despite the apparent attempts of the prosecution, Liggett, and Holman to hide this exculpatory information from the defense. Wanting to allay his fears that an innocent man was sitting in Westville, Click agreed to attend the meeting with Holman, hoping that he would be learning that evidence did in fact exist linking Richard Allen to the murders. Click's hopes were dashed. Paragraph 17 of Click's affidavit. Upon directing the letter to Mr. McClelland, I heard nothing from the prosecutor's office or any other members of Unified Command until I received phone calls on August 23rd and August 25th, 2023, which involved brief discussions regarding scheduling. During these phone calls, it was requested that I meet with Trooper Holman during the week of September 4th, 2023. I was informed that law enforcement officials intended to sit down with me and discuss with me the reason why Richard Allen was responsible for these crimes. I was told that he, Jerry Holman, wanted to put my mind at ease. However, during the meeting with Detective Holman and a second detective whose name I am unfamiliar with, there was no discussion or offerings as to why they believed Richard Allen was guilty of the charged crimes. I believe the interview was an attempt by them to clean up their loose ends, knowing that they had given very little, if any, attention to the investigative efforts of myself, Detective Ferenczi, and Detective Murphy. Emphasis added. 4. Not only did Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett fail to include all this Odinite information in his October 13, 2022 affidavit for search warrant, and not only did McClelland and the Unified Command withhold exculpatory evidence, Liggett also concealed damaging witness statements that devastate Liggett's timeline, a timeline Liggett needed to be true in order to place Richard Allen at the trail when Abby and Libby were abducted. Additionally, Liggett lied in his affidavit about the statements of another key witness, further devastating Liggett's timeline. 5. Richard Allen has zero connections to any pagan cult or pagan cultists, and furthermore no forensic evidence, such as DNA, or electronic evidence links Richard Allen to the girls or to the crime scene. 9. He is a completely innocent man. 6. Most of the evidence backing these assertions was found scattered over no less than 10 hard drives and several flash drives provided by the prosecution, meaning that the defense is not making wild accusations, but rather primarily relaying facts and information that is backed up by the prosecutor's own discovery, even discovery that the prosecution just provided to the defense as late as September 8, 2023. 7. Not coincidentally, members, Odinists of this same pagan cult, are employed as corrections officers for the Indiana Department of Corrections at Westville Correctional Facility. It is inside of the cold, concrete walls of the maximum security unit of this dilapidated reformatory that Richard Allen is being threatened, intimidated, and mentally abused. 8. Throughout this document, references are made to the Unified Command. Essentially, the Unified Command was the leadership of the Delphi murder investigation, according to Tony Liggett, Carroll County Sheriff and member of Unified Command when the investigation began. Unified Command consisted of law enforcement from a variety of entities. Local, state, and federal. Unified Command were overseers of the entire investigative operation.
Thanks so much for your support of Profiling Evil, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.